Hello, my name is Tim Smith, and welcome to another Monuments Monday. And this will be the last episode in which we answer questions from our viewers for a while. Next week, we're going to get back out onto the field, and I have a whole series of videos planned on monuments, markers, and tablets in the town of Gettysburg. But we have a couple questions from viewers, and one of them is from top fan Estelle Beard. Hi, Tim. Glenn and I have really been enjoying your Monuments Monday. I was wondering if you might do a round top tour and talk about some of those monuments on Big Round Top and how in the world they ever got placed on that hill. Fascinating question. And yes, an upcoming video I am planning to do is Big Round Top and some of the monuments on Big Round Top and a little bit of the history of Big Round Top for that period. It's fascinating that she would ask this question because also this ties into something I talked about in another video on the First Massachusetts, and that's how do you move these large stones into position? And specifically on the summit of Big Round Top, we have like the 119th Pennsylvania Monument, the 5th Pennsylvania Reserves Memorial, and the 12th Pennsylvania Reserves Memorial. And if you look at them, you might notice that those monuments are in pieces. And so they obviously hauled the pieces up and then put them together. But here's an interesting article in our local newspaper, the Gettysburg Compiler, from September of 1890. Another of the reserve monuments was finished last week. The 1st Infantry on the wheat field, which of course includes Company K, 1st Pennsylvania Reserves from Adams County. Work is now in progress on the 12th Pennsylvania Reserves on the crest of Big Round Top. In hauling this monument, Mr. Roach accomplished the feat of taking a heavy 6-horse wagon with a 5-ton stone within a few feet of the top. The work being done by tackle, worked by 4 mules. So that's very interesting. In the newspaper, they talk about how difficult it was to get that monument up there. And in another article, a week later, work on the reserves monuments is being pushed by Messrs. Roach and Barber. The 11th and the 6th monuments were finished last week, both in the wheat field. The 12th on Big Round Top is now being set in place. Others are expected daily. The 30-ton Ricketts Battery Monument will likely come last. The big wagon, and we'll show an image of the big wagon, used here several times before in the moving of heavy jobs, will be used to transport this stone. So there was this specially designed wagon that they used to move the monuments. And the image we're showing is the 1st Massachusetts monument being moved into position. And I couldn't help but notice that the monument is on the Emmitsburg Road, not far from where the spur of the Gettysburg-Harrisburg Railroad, the Round Top extension or spur of that railroad, crossed the Emmitsburg Road. And I got to thinking that perhaps, these monuments have to be brought in by train, and perhaps they would stop the train at a convenient location and unload the stones. And sure enough, I found an article in 1889 in the Gettysburg Compiler about the monument to the 17th Pennsylvania Cavalry. Last week, the immense stone to mark the position of the 17th Pennsylvania Cavalry at Mr. John S. Forney's was unloaded from the cars at the Mummersburg Road and hauled with ropes and pulleys on the Smith company's big wagon to the foundation. The stone is 10 feet high, 10 broad, and 3 feet thick. So it's interesting that, you know, they didn't bring the monument on the train all the way into the town and then try to unload it in the middle of town at the freight warehouse and then try to put it on a wagon. They just pulled it out like a quarter mile from the railroad track is where the monument was, and then just hauled it up the hill in the big wagon. And the most interesting story about the big wagon that I found was the monument in the center of Pardee Field. And you might know that the area of the Spangler farm was renamed Pardee Field in honor of Ario Pardee, who was the colonel of the 147th Pennsylvania. And in August of 1905, there's this interesting thing in the paper. The 22-ton stone has been taken to the field, devoid of timber, along Geary Avenue, northwest of Spangler Spring. The base for the big stone has already been built. The stone will be placed on a foundation this week. The journey of the big stone down through Bushman's Meadow and across and along Geary Avenue and then up to near the center of Pardee Field consumed the 6 days of last week. The Bushman Meadow is swampy, and at 3 different points, bridges had to be built of ties and planks to carry the big wagon and stone. When Geary Avenue was reached, the wagon and mules were abandoned, and James E. Roach and those helping him handled it so easily that it was a sight to see. Ropes, block, and tackle with windlass hitched to the trees did the work, and the big stone went slowly on the rollers underneath it. Watching it was a demonstration of the wisdom of making haste slowly. And, you know, I mean, that's just amazing that we have these articles in the paper about hauling these large stones into place. And think about that next time you're out on the battlefield and you see one of these immense monuments. Top fan Richard Coleman asks, if I wanted to learn more about the monuments at Gettysburg, when they were dedicated, who made them, where they are, what books would you suggest I read? Well, that's really interesting. And we did a video called Monuments 101, where I talked a little bit about some resources available. But I tell you what, in this video, we're going to put some links in with the video so you can check out some of these sources, because a lot of these are available on the internet. And, you know, since Pennsylvania is about 1/3 of the Northern Army and New York is 1/3 of the Northern Army, I think everyone should read Pennsylvania at Gettysburg, Volume 1 and 2. I believe it was printed around 1904, and it has in it a little bit of information about the dedication ceremonies of all the Pennsylvania monuments. So you can, in the beginning, there's a little information about the monuments in general, and then there's the dedication ceremonies, like the 11th Pennsylvania, for instance, and you can read about the monuments and the units in that book. And the same with New York at Gettysburg, that was published around the same time in the early 1900s, and it is just filled with wonderful information about the various units from New York that were involved in the battle. New York at Gettysburg has an introduction in which they actually give a little history of the battle, so it's very valuable in that case also. So for the main monuments on the battlefield, the major monuments, we have New York at Gettysburg and Pennsylvania at Gettysburg. And speaking of main monuments, you know, there's a Maine at Gettysburg. There's a rare Ohio at Gettysburg. You know, many of the states have these volumes, and you can read about those particular monuments. monuments. Also, and it's been reprinted, but there's a book called Gettysburg Then and Now by Vanderslice. And this is a history of the Gettysburg Battlefield Memorial Association. And I don't know how I got so lucky. I bought or reprinted this book when it was printed by Morningside, I believe in the 1980s, and I read it, and it's just fabulous. And it has information in the back of it about the history of the GBMA, and it has a little bit of information about the monuments that were put up by each northern state. So it's just fascinating and great information. And then, of course, also, when I was young, I happened to buy in a local flea market the Gettysburg National Military Park Commission reports from 1893 to 1904. And while the commission, took control of the battlefield, they did a yearly report of the roads and the progress made on the battlefield and the construction of the roads and different things. And it's just filled with photographs. And, these books I'm sure you can find available online. For specific information, listings of the monuments, of course, I think I mentioned in a previous video, Kathy George reprinted a book that had been printed yearly by the War Department Commission and then later the National Park. And it's a listing of all the monuments, markers, and tablets on the battlefield. And I'm sure you can buy Kathy George's version around. It's been reprinted several times, and it has pretty comprehensively all the monuments and markers on the battlefield. I don't think it lists individual flank markers, but it also lists some of the advanced position markers and stuff like that. But it tells you if they know the date of dedication and where the monument is located. As far as, there's no real comprehensive guide to where all the monuments are. And I think that's kind of annoying to me. Like, here's a really good book by Tom Huntington. It's published by Stackpole, but it says right on the cover, find every monument and marker in the park. No, it is not comprehensive. A lot of these books are not meant to be comprehensive, but give a really good overview of some of the stories associated with the monuments. I like Gettysburg, Stories of Men and Monuments as Told by the Battlefield Guides. And this was written by the president of the Association of Licensed Battlefield Guides years ago, Fred Hawthorne. And it gives it's kind of a good overview of the battle and tells stories about various monuments. And people who are interested in the monuments should read and know this book. Eastern Alcorn Press, who at one point ran the bookstore, published the Sculptures of Gettysburg by Wayne Craven, and it's really information, really good information on the monuments around the battlefield, and a lot of detailed information on a few of the monuments that I really recommend. And you could probably find that on eBay or something. David Martin did a book called Confederate Monuments at Gettysburg. Now, of the 1,700 monuments, markers, and tablets around the battlefield, only about 20 of them were placed by southern states. So we really don't have that many. But in his book, he actually is talking about all the southern monuments and markers and tablets, including the hundreds of them that were placed by the War Department. So I do not count them as southern monuments. But he also has it out more recently in paperback, and it's a description of the monuments and when they were put up and what we know about the text and how it was written. And I would recommend that. One thing that I think people tend to overlook is the fact that you can go on eBay and you can buy Gettysburg souvenir booklets. William Tipton, in the 1890s, published a book of views of the battlefield, and in his book, he has a photograph of every one of the regimental monuments at that time and a little bit of information about it. And later, this book was published by Meligakis, and you can again buy these on eBay or find them online. And again, it has the photographs of every monument. And there was one published by Chisholm Brothers, I believe, out of Maine. And again, it's William Tipton's photography, but it has like every monument, marker, and tablet in it. And these are as comprehensive as some of these modern ones that claim to be comprehensive. Boy, if you want to make me mad, say that you have a book that is a comprehensive book on every monument, marker, tablet. No such thing. There are, one thing, let me mention this. Roy Frampton, in 1987, one of the battlefield guides, did a comprehensive series of volumes on the inscription of every monument, marker, and tablet on the field, and he has maps. This is what the cover looks like. But it was only published in a very, very small quantity, and we have it in the Licensed Battlefield Guide office, and of course we have a copy of it here at the Historical Society. So if you come to do research here, we have something that's pretty comprehensive. And then something I'd mention that we have here that's very interesting, we have a lot of dedication ceremonies for monuments. We also have scrapbooks. This is a J. Howard Wirt scrapbook, and he actually pasted articles into a scrapbook detailing the erection and dedication of monuments on the battlefield in the 1880s and 90s, and sometimes actually puts in correspondence with the veterans, and some of the programs for some of the dedication monuments are in his scrapbook, which is just fabulous. There are a couple maps you might be interested in. There was a map put out by an organization called Trailhead Graphics, and it was published in 1995, and they did a reprint of it in 2008. I'm not sure if it's available still, but it has the locations of monuments, markers, and tablets. Again, no flank markers or other markers, but it's pretty good, and it has a listing of them and where they are. And also, I wanted to point out that we have a bird's eye view of Gettysburg from 1888. And the bird's eye view of the battlefield was published, and you can actually look for the monuments, markers, and tablets. They actually have them around it. And at this time, when this is published, I think maybe I counted like 72 monuments that they show on the battlefield at this time. And, I have one hanging on my wall, and I'm sure that you can find this. This is actually on the Library of Congress website, and we'll put a link to this so you can check it out. And lastly, there's the computer. And I think we'd be remiss if we didn't mention that a lot of these sources are available online. And also, there is a website, a very nice website called Stone Sentinels, which tells you about Civil War monuments in general and gives you a brief description of monuments on the Gettysburg battlefield. And, the information on there is sometimes really good, or it's just a little bit of information about the monument, but it's a place where you can go and look for each of the monuments on the field. And I just wanted to mention at the end here that there is an app that you can download on your phone, and it's called Pocket Gettysburg, and it's done by Bob Velke, a man who is just incredible at the information he's able to put into this app. But I use this. I think it costs like $9.99 to download on your phone, and basically it's hooked to a GPS, and it has most every monument, marker, and tablet on the Gettysburg battlefield. And you can find out where it is or read about it. And also, he has information about the units that were involved in the battle. And he put in here the complete list of the Pennsylvania monument. So he's got 34,530 names in this from the Pennsylvania monument. And what I did on my tours for years after this app came out is if somebody said they were from Pennsylvania, I would ask their name, and if they had a Pennsylvania local kind of sounding name, at some point on the tour, I would open up the app and punch in their last name. And then when we got to the Pennsylvania monument, I would coolly walk over to the monument and walk right up to their name on the monument and point to it. And people flipped out when you could just point out their last name and act like you know where every last name on the monument is. So there's an app like that that allows you to cheat and make it seem like you know more about the battle than you actually do. Well, thanks for watching our video, and if you like the information we put on our YouTube channel, please like and subscribe.